Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's Freemanjack on TNS Radio and Scottish Sovereigns on the Land. Tonight's show will be adult topics, possibly with adult language, and interruptions from the staircase, which thanks, love. It cooks in here. That's the only trouble with the bloody door shut. Yeah, sorry for not being around the last couple of weeks. I'd had a bit of an intellectual compression wave. Essentially, I dived a bit deep into particle physics and found myself with my head stuck up my arse and couldn't think in a straight line. Managed to kind of divert myself from torsion physics and three-dimensional vector diagrams, just to stumble in time to stumble into computing with Linux. Kind of very interesting subject. I mean, most of us will probably be using a Windows or a Mac machine, and all computers run on something called machine code. This is the underlying programming language with which the software interacts with the hardware. Now, I've been using computers sort of on a regular basis since about 96, I believe, was my first personal computer. It was a couple of years behind the bleeding edge at the time. It was the Pentium 1 processor, and I believe it was the second generation one. The original Pentium 1 processor was actually a 166 hertz 166 hertz, 166 kilohertz. Can't remember which, but anyway, an absolute fraction of the speed of even the processor that your phone is likely to have at the moment. I actually had the 333, I think, model, actually. It was the second that they released. And this was running on Windows 3.1, which was the first of the Windows series that came with its own graphical user interface. Now, we all are used to starting our computers and being presented with a screen with little icons on it, and you click on an icon and something happens. Well, before Windows 3.1, that wasn't the case. Anything that you wanted to instruct a computer to do, you would have had to have done through something called the DOS prompt, or a command box, which would have been a simple black text screen, and you would have to know the specific programming language commands in order to be able to facilitate each task that you were trying to undertake. The Windows 3.1 environment was, although it was a graphical user interface, it was only the very most basic of graphic user interfaces. Essentially, you had a sort of start and stop button, and sort of an internet and email button, and very little else. Everything else was still run essentially through the DOS prompt and through command language. Anyway, kind of stayed with sort of just trailing behind the leading edge of PCs ever since. Had a few forays into the sort of bleeding edge technologies, but have found them largely very fragile. Essentially, if you go for a machine that currently is in blazing specs, I built one machine that was such a bloody hot rod, it took me 3 months to even get the hardware that I'd assembled to run the thing with, to even boot successfully to an operating system. I ended up getting a experimental development code for the BIOS out of the manufacturers of the motherboard after doing several about faces, sending the board back to base. That's still a bloody good PC to this day. I mean, I built that, Christ, nearly 5-7 years ago, something along those lines, and if I put that up against modern machines, it's certainly as good as a current laptop, a high-spec laptop, which is pretty impressive. But anyway, Windows in its early days was much like still like much of the sort of computing the computing fraternity was very libertarian and egalitarian, and as a consequence very much was open source software still open for development on the sort of in the kind of coding community. And slowly, as time went on, and as Microsoft became the corporate giant that it is today, and Macintosh to a degree, so the security of their base code, their machine code, became more and more developed as they became more and more sensitive to kind of software piracy and constantly trying to patch up the holes that the hackers were finding in the back doors of the machines. And it wasn't very long before the Linux community sprang into existence. I think it was actually before 96. I think some of the Linux original OSs date right back to 94. But essentially the Linux community sprung up in the face of the systematic secretizing of the code on which the internet worked. In fact, computing full stop. And this was quite an important sort of step forward, that the sort of liberalising and open sourcing the software code that machines were running on allowed a much broader spectrum of individual users. What do you want, Michael? Oh, bloody hell. Yeah, you couldn't have done that any other way, could you? Oh dear, distractions. Where was I? So essentially the Linux community began to write and distribute amongst themselves software that they had written by and for themselves, and basing it on a computing language that was very much stronger. Even when Microsoft Windows started out using DOS, it was already known to be a hugely poor system. And the fact that Windows has based ever larger, more precarious towers of code over the top of DOS over the years, without any real kind of starting from scratch and rethinking, that this is one of the reasons why we face so many problems with sort of Windows machines to this very day. And they're still hardly the most stable things on the planet. And this just simply didn't do for servers. Essentially, once the internet became mainstream, business began to rely on the ability of the internet to make, making transactions and orders and things work much more seamlessly and much faster. So as a result, the internet began to lean more and more heavily on server code written by the Linux community. Oh, for fuck's sake. And as a result, the Linux community became supported by industry without ever having really sold out to industry. And what we see now is an internet infrastructure that is based almost solely on Linux machines. This being because they're so hard to hack into, and once a stable running state has been established, they rarely ever go wrong. Now, right from, I can't remember the first dabbling I had with Linux. My word, it's a long time ago now, probably getting on for 10 years. And as a bit of a noob, I never really got much above sort of beginner level computing. I managed to make it do what I wanted it to do, and then I was satisfied with that. I never particularly looked into, how to make it work better, or etc., etc. And as a result, the complexities of trying to run a Linux operating system was essentially beyond my sort of capacities. And despite several attempts over the years, I was always defeated by the complexity of simply installing and accessing a Linux operating system. Now, that pretty much remained the state of play. Like I say, over the interceding 10 years, I would frequently dip my toe into Linux and find another distribution that everybody was raving about and saying that it was easiest yet to use, and etc., etc., and would attempt to install said operating system, again to no real success. I never either was able to access the operating system that I'd installed, or having accessed it could ever get it to do anything. So I kind of abandoned all hope. And then about 2 years ago, Ubuntu began being referred to in with sort of sweeping terms of praise as being the kind of Windows killer. And so, again, had a little kind of delve into Ubuntu, and certainly my experiences so far with Ubuntu have been incredibly rewarding. A lot of these names you'll have to bear in mind there are so many different Linux distributions, because essentially anybody can rummage under the bonnet and churn out their own version of Linux. There are almost, as many flavours of Linux as you can, possibly think of. Most of them with really silly names. But the main ones I'll be referring to this evening will probably be the Mint operating system, the CentOS operating system, and the Ubuntu and Ubuntu Studio interfaces. So Ubuntu came about, or came of age, let's say, perhaps 2 or 3 years ago, and certainly it got to a stage whereby burning it onto a DVD and running it in live mode, it was fairly straightforward to get just about any machine to accept this as its operating system. In practice, I found that although running a Linux operating system in live mode from a DVD, as in what this means is to the Linux distributions, when you burn them to a DVD, offer you the opportunity of trying the operating system without actually installing it to your machine, and consequently they can actually run the operating system from a DVD or a CD or a USB stick. Theoretically, if a Linux distribution will run on your machine in live mode, then theoretically it should install and work perfectly when you actually install it to the drive itself. In practice, I found that in the early days of sort of Ubuntu 10, which would have probably been about 2 years ago, they're a regular distribution releases of any stable version of these operating systems, so you expect the numbers to rise fairly rapidly. We're currently up to Ubuntu 12.10. This improved markedly with the release of 11.10, which would have been about a year and a half ago now, I believe, and you started to see a Linux distribution that, while it didn't have the slick interface of a Windows or a Mac machine, it was very, very utilitarian and very, very functional, and did what it said on the tin. And moreover, it did exactly what it said on the tin, with some 50,000 items of software which are all available free and from a simple, 2-click application on the desktop. So with 11.10, I suddenly find myself in the realms of being tempted to dabble in Linux again, and really a few things kind of pushed you in that direction. A couple of machines I didn't have operating system disks for, corrupted hard drives, broken hard drives, whatever, have resulted in have left me with a machine with a functional machine with no operating system and with no licensed version of Windows to install. So rather than doing the various hacks and cracks that you can do to get Windows to work, I started installing Linux on those sorts of machines, and we've progressed now, and having sort of run stable distributions of Linux now for sort of over a year, I began to sort of dabble my toe in a little more to see if I could actually learn this kind of Linux language that seems quite exclusive when you approach it as an outsider, as a newbie. And as it turned out, I've found that largely, if you can get the machine into a state where it can access the internet, then you have absolutely no need to actually know any Linux coding at all. If you place your desired action into a Google search and place the distribution of Linux that you wish to do that action on into the search term, you will be guaranteed to see several results where you can simply copy and paste the code directly from your web browser and paste it directly into terminal to effect whatever changes you want to effect. Plus, in some of the more kind of Windows replacement operating systems like Mint, that's mostly unnecessary, and in fact almost everything that you want to do in Mint is perfectly doable through the desktop operating system GUI, graphical user interface. So Mint certainly is a real Windows beating operating system. Any of you guys out there like fiddling with knobs and buttons with the audio stuff? There's a distribution of Ubuntu called Ubuntu Studio, and this just comes loaded with whistles, bells and knobs. Only available in its full version on a DVD, so you'll need either a significant size USB stick, a 4 gig USB stick plus, or a DVD in order to be able to burn these distros. Bearing in mind all of these are available completely freely over the internet. You do not have to pay for any of this. The only time you'll ever be asked to donate even is on the Ubuntu sites. If you try and access the ISOs directly, and even then there's a no thanks button clearly next to the please donate, and I think the amount they ask you to donate is nominal as well. Yes, and essentially choosing your OS is like choosing your kind of flavour of fruit, really. It's very much down to taste. For people who are more kind of Mac based, I would suggest that the Studio interface would be very much more sort of what they are familiar with. It's a very Mac-y interface, and Mint is quite the opposite. Mint is very Windows. It has a very Windows kind of look and feel about it, while still being a completely unique interface. So all of these will take a little bit of learning. But the glory of this is that there's actually sort of 3 ways that you can play with these without troubling your machine at all. Like I've already said, you can download these operating systems and burn them to a DVD and basically run the operating system from the DVD. There's also this lovely little program called Lili, which you can use from, I think, Macs or Windows machines, certainly Windows machines, to create a USB stick with your chosen operating system already loaded on it. And if you change your boot priority in your BIOS on your machine to accept the USB, or you can use F12 boot for drive options, boot drive options. You can, like I say, run these operating systems from a USB stick. The glory of this Lili is it also enables you to utilise something called persistence mode, and this allows you to create an area of the USB stick. For some reason, it only seems to be able to reference about 6 gigabytes. So I did this on a 16 gig stick and only ended up with 6 gigabytes of it available. So it would appear to be pointless in using Lili on a USB stick bigger than 6 gigabytes. But essentially, if you use this persistence mode, this will allow you to use that area on the USB stick that hasn't been filled up with operating system for as a memory area for the operating system, which allows the operating system to remember any changes that you've made. So when you boot from this USB stick operating system, if you have to apply any changes, if you put in any passwords or whatever, that's all remembered to an area on the USB stick. And when you reboot a computer or take that USB stick to another computer and boot it up, there's your operating system in the state that you last left it in. There's also another way of doing this, which is probably less threatening to most Windows or Mac users, and that's that when you create one of these USB sticks through the Lili program, I think possibly the VM program may be loaded onto the DVD if you burn it from ISO, but I haven't used it from there. So, but certainly in the USB mode, the build of the ISO, the disk image onto the USB stick includes something called a virtual machine. And what you can do is from Windows, or I think Macs as well, is you simply plug in your USB stick, click on this virtual machine, tell it what operating system you want to boot into, and within a window within your Windows operating system, a virtual PC will be created and a Linux operating system will be loaded to run on that virtual PC. Now, the problem with this in most Linux distributions is before a Linux distribution is really fit for purpose, you usually have to install a lot of bits and pieces, Flash Player and other plugins, etc. And the problem with virtual machines is that when you shut down the virtual machine, all of your settings are lost. So again, if you're wanting to do this, there are horses for courses. And again, here the Mint operating system comes into its own. The Mint operating system comes with most of your whistles and bells already switched on. So when you run Mint from a virtual machine, you've already got Flash Player installed. You can go to YouTube, you can go to any video enabled web page and display the video through the virtual machine. Now you might wonder why you might want to do this. Well, this comes down to the Unix code again. This is the base machine code through which Linux interacts with your PC hardware. And the Unix code I think it's said that there are no viruses in the wild that are able to infect a Unix machine. There are said to be some in laboratories somewhere that have been created that can theoretically infect a Unix machine, but it said that they haven't been bothered to be released because the Unix machine code is tied up so tight, and there would have to be so many layers of permission that the user would have to allow before a virus could actually act on that machine, that it's essentially pointless, that there would be so many times that a password would have to be entered in order for this to work, that there is no point in there being any Unix viruses in the wild. And so essentially, if you're sort of browsing sites, if you're frequently picking up viruses through your browsing history by starting one of these Linux virtual machines within the VM environment, essentially firewalls the browsing that you're doing from your Windows or Mac environment. That essentially the browser pane is working through a completely different set of machine code from within this virtual environment and can't interact with the main PC at all unless you sort of enable that. So, got a message from Tim. We got Tim wanting to call in. Yeah, okay, we can have Tim from Tang in. I haven't actually chatted to Tim yet. Let me chuck on a couple of tunes because I've got to refresh my cup of tea before I do that, geez. But yeah, I would love for you to call in because, to be quite honest, while I'm getting my teeth into Linux, I think you've probably been doing it for a bit longer. But we'll see. Right, okay. Oh, bloody hell. Let's find a couple of tunes then. Yeah, hold on, Tim. Bloody hell. I'll call you back in a second. And we're back on air, and we've got Tim from Tang.
How do you do, Jack? Nice to talk to you for the first time.
Oh, you do? Yeah, first time we've chatted, isn't it? And we're back on air, this time with an audible Tim from Tang. Good evening, Tim.
Jack. Evening, Jack.
Good to hear from you. Yes, I was just saying while we were lining up the call there that, what were you saying? You got 13 years with Linux now? That's certainly an appropriate guest to have on a show all about Linux, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I kind of started because I got the hump with Bill Gates.
Oh, that's very easy to do, isn't it?
Yeah, I discovered the story of how he stole his first operating system, if you like. Now I put the stole in inverted commas because he didn't steal it, but very nearly.
Bill Gates has it very big ears.
That's correct. And the other thing was, I didn't like, I've never liked living on a lot of money, I've been a big earner, and I didn't like paying financially for things. And I'm a tinkerer, I like to play with stuff.
You and me both.
And all this software stuff that you get from commercial companies, you're not allowed to look at the source code, you're not allowed to play with it, you're not allowed to mess with it, and you're definitely not allowed to share it. All these things you can do in Linux.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially the sharing.
I mean, with the source code, one of the things that I was marvelling at today was the fact that things like the network config files are all there in a bloody folder. That's all you got to do is delve down through any given directory on any given kind of action that your machine might be taking, and you'll find the actual code that does the work. Oh, you just don't do that with Windows.
But it does have a problem in Linux that way, because each distribution is different, and they tend to put their configuration files in different places, and so that does cause some problems when you're distro hopping, and certainly causes problems for people who are new.
I think that must about sum me up at the moment, distro hopping. I've currently got 5 different distros running on 5 different machines in the house.
That's usually the best technique. If you've not chosen your computer specially to run Linux on, which is what I do now, I pretty much exclusively use IBM ThinkPads because they nearly all take Linux beautifully. So when you're got a laptop and you want to run Linux on it, or a desktop and you want to run Linux on it, because the distros are all different, if you hop and choose loads of different ones, you're going to find one that works out of the box. And if you get one that works just enough for an internet connection, from there's so many enthusiasts about Linux out there, and they're all volunteers. They're all enthusiastic.
Well, like I say, my experience has been that every single piece of code that I've actually needed to access has been out there on the internet.
That's correct. It is. People have asked the question before, and they've answered the question.
I mean, to a degree, you do still have to have a modicum of specialist knowledge. Things like IP addressing and things like that are usually beneath the scope of most Windows users, whereas if you're setting up any sort of a collection of machines with Linux, you've definitely got to be able to at least understand some of the protocols and
yeah. Well, there's two schools of thought on that one really with Linux. The networking is simpler to set up in Linux if you're an expert, but much harder if you're a user, shall we say, just someone who picks up the thing and just uses it, doesn't know what it does or anything. It's a black box. And with untroublesome machines and Windows, just the user thing works quite well. But whenever you read a troublesome machine, because you can't access the source code, you've got to wait weeks for the blasted company to sort it out. Whereas with Linux, you have to make this initial small intellectual investment to actually understand what's going on. When you've done that, you can do everything, as you observed with the configuration files, quite easily. It's nice.
I mean,
it's sovereign software, that's what it is. It's sovereign software.
Yeah. I mean, and as well, I mean, you're fairly limited for the amount of power that you've got available, am I right?
That's correct.
You're essentially off-grid, aren't you?
Very nearly. We have a 7.5 amp supply.
Right, okay, so nominal. Yeah, because one of the things that I really noticed when I installed Mint on a Sony Vaio on a modern laptop, the processor demand drops to almost zero. I mean, admittedly, it's like an i5 quad-core jobby with a significant amount of RAM. But processor consumption is nominal on all four chips at all times, and you can barely raise memory consumption above 500 meg.
That's right.
And as a consequence,
this distribution called WattOS, WATTOS, which is even better because it specialises in reducing power consumption.
Okay.
And you could actually double the battery life of some laptops.
Well, to be quite honest, Mint is certainly the declared battery life is double on Mint. You boot it into Windows and it will tell you you've got 2.5 hours, 2 3/4 hours or whatever on battery. You boot back into Mint and it's there telling you you've got sort of 6 hours on standby and 4 or more on power.
That's right, although I would question how accurate that might be with Mint. Mint is an Irish distribution,
as I've heard.
It's written and developed in Ireland, and it's based on Ubuntu and Debian, Debian is a very big basis for most Linux distributions, for many of them. So it's like a layer upon a layer upon a layer, and each set of developers tend to have different priorities,
I mean, one of the things that I'd like to just sort of clarify for people here is why you might want to do this. Well, I suppose really to decide why you might want to do something, it's probably actually more important as to possibly come to it from why you might not want to do it.
Definitely, I agree.
And in all of my years of mucking about with Linux, really the only balking point for me was its interference with the master boot record with Windows.
Yeah.
Which I now have several workarounds for, and with Grub 2, I tend to find that it's actually quite a stable environment anyway, so I'm happy to use the dual boot facility. But the other issue has always been accessibility of professional software.
Yeah.
So for me, in my video editing and audio editing, obviously Audacity is the same on both, but as far as video editing packages, you can get quite powerful ones for Linux, but they're nothing like the gloss and the polish of the stuff that you work with on a Windows or a Mac machine.
I would agree, definitely.
You know, even iMovie just outshines, anything that's available on Linux as far as, graphics handling, which is a real shame. I think that's a real kind of fault that the community hasn't identified yet. It has kind of missed out on that niche. And it may be down to the complexity of the codes required and stuff, but...
Yeah, and the amount of effort that people are prepared to put in voluntarily.
Yeah, absolutely.
One website that we should definitely mention is called distrowatch.com. That's distrowatch.com. If you haven't gone to that website, I'll just stick it in the chat box here. It covers all of the distributions of Linux.
I think that was the review site that I was using that sent me in the direction of Mint. Yeah,
and you'll notice when you look at distrowatch.com on the right-hand side that Mint is the top distribution.
Yeah, which
appears in the chat box.
I mean, just to complete my point there, the reason why I suggested that there are these things that aren't really available through the Linux distributions that are available with Windows is that they are, just to make that clear, is that they are largely the professional software packages, the expensive professional software packages. Now, I haven't looked into purchased Linux software, so I haven't looked into the realm of the developed Linux software. So I don't know about that side of things. Maybe you could comment on that. But for me, certainly things like the Linux, like the Mint distribution that I've got running on the laptop, essentially as a common or garden Windows user, there is nothing that I would need with LibreOffice, with the OpenOffice software that comes installed by default, with Mozilla Firefox and all of the various mail clients and stuff that come ready installed. It's whistles and bells. There's nothing really more that you need there.
I've just stuck two words in the chat box there: Tux Paint and Child's Play. One thing I can say about Linux is that the software for children is absolutely wonderful. The very highest quality. And it's written by people who genuinely want the children to know how to use computers without any agenda. There's no commercial agenda. And something I've noticed about Windows software for children is it often has a commercial agenda. So that's one reason why you might want to use Linux. If you had children and you wanted them to be able to learn to use the computer, there's wonderful children's software out there.
I mean, this is the thing for me, is that I really honestly feel like I am just genuinely learning how to use a computer, having, like I say, come to computers from Windows 3.1, which was, like I say, the first GUI operating system where it wasn't necessary to know base code in order to be able to get a machine to boot up. That I have relied so heavily on that graphical user interface that essentially I have never done anything on a computer that hasn't been through a GUI.
Yes.
Apart from, the most, programming the IP addresses into a router or whatever you might do through a Unix interface, but even that you'll do through a browser that's on a web browser that you're completely familiar with, so it doesn't seem like you're interfacing with it at all. That's
right, yeah. There's many other reasons why you would want to use Linux. Rescuing old computers is a favourite of mine. I have.
I dragged an old 2200 Dell out to test one of these to see what the consequence was. I was actually a little disappointed that the 32-bit version of Mint didn't actually appear to enhance the performance of this old crunchy old Dell particularly.
There are specialist distributions specially designed for old computers.
Right, I'll have to look into that. I mean, this was a bit of a kind of slapdash install just to see what I could get going on this old machine. And
if you look on DistroWatch, there's a search button at the top. And if you hit the search button, you'll find that you could choose all sorts of different things about the kind of distribution you're looking for. And one of the categories is old machines. And there's loads of people out there using Linux on really old computers. My mum, who's not computer literate at all, uses Linux on her laptop, which is 9 years old. It's a 9-year-old HP laptop. And I have a Linux operating system installed on that, and she can surf the web, and she can do her Word documents and write her letters on that much more easily than she could using any Windows system.
Yeah, I mean, the customizability of it as well is key there, because it literally is horses for courses, isn't it?
And it's free. If you have, let's imagine you've got a Windows operating system and you want some image editing software. Well, you can't download it off the internet, even if you've got a credit card. You've got to go to a shop and buy it. But with Linux, you just open up your software manager, or Synaptic is a personal favourite of mine, and just install it.
I must admit, I tend to go to BitTorrent sites and just download the suckers.
Yeah.
But that's the other thing as well, of course, is that the Linux system is supported by really everybody working into the system. So even the likes of you or I, if we aren't in a position to financially donate to the system, simply by signing up to forums and posting our inquiries and our responses, what our real world experience of the responses were, just is how the system has been built, isn't it?
That's right, and when using Linux, you find that new hardware is often not very well supported straight away. And so the first person to get a new computer who puts Linux on it, who's technically literate, when he solves the problem with his sound card or with his graphics card or with his internet access and posts it on the forums and sticks at it until he solves the problem, and then he sticks it up there on the internet, well, he's made as big a contribution to the Linux operating system as anyone who presses the donate button and gives however many dollars they give. Because he's helped thousands of other users that you have observed who just Google it then when they run into the problem on their machine, and they just Google it, someone's already solved it.
And again, we're coming up again with a model for future computing that includes the huge savings of energy that a double multiplication of battery life on things like laptops is going to entail. I mean, the battery life is obviously is a combination of the ability of the machine to run coolly on low resources and to manage battery life. But of course, that's extended when you've got the thing plugged in. It's equally drawing as less. Half as much power from the power supply. So when you add that up through thousands and thousands of machines, those few little watts here and there are all going to make a significant difference. Add to that the energetic requirements for a modern PC manufacturing process and the duration of most of those parts. I mean, let's face it, an integrated circuit, capacitor life tends to come into play a little bit, but on these small, low-voltage integrated circuits, capacitor life can be, 10 years. And so you can have hardware that's quite comfortably still chugging along after 10 years. And frankly, once we got to the 2.2 gig or 2 gig processors of 10 years ago, there was almost nothing that you could do on a computer other than graphics, number crunching, hungry packages that wouldn't happen essentially instantaneously.
That's right. The other thing that Linux includes is its users. You see, Windows doesn't really include its users. But Linux does include its users. Its users are Linux. Everyone who develops Linux is a Linux user, and everyone who uses Linux, every time they solve a problem, well, they're helping to develop Linux.
Mm.
So the users are completely included. It's inclusive. It's not exclusive.
And the key thing about what I was saying earlier with the advent of, I think it was Ubuntu 10, was the first distribution that I was ever really happy with. That in the past I would have always feared advising people to try Linux, knowing the level of computer illiteracy certainly amongst my friends, and knowing the horrible knotted states that I had got into with earlier distributions of Linux, just making the Windows drive completely inaccessible and horrible things like this, vast data loss and completely corrupted, unbootable machines.
Yeah.
Just meant that I could never actually advise people to try this without me kind of looking over their shoulder. Whereas now, I think that the Linux operating systems have come of age, truly come of age, and I think if you're talking about wanting to revive a dead machine, you've got nothing to risk now.
No.
And especially with this USB stick, you're not even talking about the cost of a DVD, because if this distro doesn't work from the USB stick, fuck it. Delete it, format the USB stick, stick another one on there, try that. Like I said to my mate on Skype the other day, to Nick on Skype the other day, with Lily and a USB stick and a number of downloaded distros, you could basically try 6 different distros in a day from a single memory stick.
Sure can. There's a program called UNet Bootin. I'll put that in the chat box too, which is much more reliable for putting distros on sticks, on USB sticks. It runs from Linux.
Okay.
So you got your Linux distro in, you download the next distro, you use UNet Bootin to put it on your USB stick, and then you plug it in and try it.
Yeah, so the Lily is a Windows interface anyway. I don't think that's actually available through the Linux interface, so that is a kind of
there's
a halfway house. Or does that unibooting do the persistence file that Lily handles?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a Linux variant, or an Ubuntu variant as well, called USB Creator. I've spelt it wrong in the chat box.
Uh-huh.
Which is very useful for Ubuntu distributions in particular, which don't like UNet Bootin very much.
This is the glory of that persistence mode as well, is that if you're a kind of a bit of a PC hobo, if perhaps you're so skint that you can't afford your own machine and are constantly relying on, can I use your laptop, can I do this, can I do that? Having your own little operating system on a USB stick is going to save an awful lot of rummaging around when you get to the machine that you're going to.
Yeah, well, I do it a lot when I'm travelling. I'd never carry a computer with me. I just put the USB stick in my pocket. And when I get there, I can access the computer.
Okay. Have you found
stick, and away I go.
Okay. Have you found this same sort of limitation to the size of the file that you can load onto it?
I've only got a 4 gigabyte stick because I'm not a rich man.
Oh, right, okay. Well, again, you say that, but a 16 gig stick is a nominal amount now, and so having that amount of, that's a whole bunch of DVDs. You're not going to be able to carry sort of large amounts of video files on that, but you could probably carry your entire life's worth of data.
Oh, sure, you could. Yeah,
sort of text documents and emails and the like on that stick in your pocket.
Absolutely. Mind you, don't lose it, eh?
Yeah. One of the things that I'm currently trying to do is I've built a Franken Lappy. My boy had a 400 quid i5 Lappy, bought for him a year or so ago, and he's hideously careless and always getting into shit at school. And the laptop was thrown across the school changing rooms. So this laptop ended up with no screen, and then he was using it with a separate sort of external screen in his bedroom, and had it on the floor, and consequently all the ports got smashed out of it because he was constantly treading on the cables poking out of this this poor dilapidated lappy. So I rescued this tattered remnant of a machine from his room the other day, stripped it to granny, so it's just the motherboard, the CD drive, and the hard drive. Gaffer taped the old lid to the top of the box. Gaffer taped the button on the outside, so I don't have to lift the lid to turn it on and off. And I'm currently working towards having that as a central CentOS-based server.
Oh, that explains your question in the chat box the other day about CentOS, yeah. That makes sense.
Well, CentOS is a nightmare, though.
Because I'm in control of it, I own it, and there's no licenses. That's the key, the deal maker for me. The deal maker with Linux for me is that it's free in every respect. It's not just financially free. It's intellectually free.
Yeah, ideologically free.
Ideologically free. And I think that's the secret of no viruses, because it doesn't offend anybody. Well, Linux always seeks to agree with everybody.
Yeah, I guess.
I've had a bit of contact with the developer community over the years when I've had problems with machines and things. And every time I found people to be wonderfully helpful, and provided you're clearly making the effort as well to solve the problem and prepared to learn a bit on your own, they'll really help you.
Okay, because I mean, there's an issue there, is that we have what would ostensibly be an effective piece of broadcast software for us to use at TNS in the form of this mix, MIXX.
I'm looking into that at the moment, yeah.
It's recently been released into the wild.
Unfortunately, I don't have all the tools required. Earlier, you were talking about messing up your master boot record.
Yeah.
Now, I was lucky. I did have the tools required there because I had grown up with computers and I understood the hardware quite well. And particularly, I understood hard disks and partitioning and that sort of thing. So I came to Linux with that knowledge. But when it comes to broadcast software in Linux, especially with sound and audio, I have no background experience whatsoever. And so I really need to team up with someone else who knows about audio processing and things to. I can sort out the hardware and the making things work together kind of things, but I need to know what to do, you know.
Yeah. Well, essentially, that mix software would appear to be pretty much made for the job in every respect, other than the microphone button.
Well, yeah.
And just to explain to the audience, the microphone button in this particular piece of software is designed for kind of music DJing, and it's just a hold down to talk button. Yeah. So you essentially have to click on it with the mouse and keep that mouse click held in order to keep talking on it. Which, of course, dealing with the environment we deal in with, responding to the chat box and having this and that and the other going simultaneously while broadcasting on TNS, it's simply not feasible to tie up your mouse in a single action that prevents any other mouse clicks from being able to take place. So this might be an opportunity to get in touch with the developers of Mix and tell them what we're doing. And would I be right in thinking that there's likely to be a switch within the code that can simply be rewritten to allow for the mic button to stay engaged?
And I suggest if you contact the developer with your problem that he might be very happy to do that alteration for you and send you the file and put a separate variant out there with that alteration done. If you can make a good enough argument to him that you should have two versions and point out your problem about why it doesn't work for you.
Well, and this is the point, that with the command interface, with the terminal that you use as the command line interface for Linux, it would be possible for that developer to simply not necessarily to send you an entire file, but simply to send you the edited version of the code text that you'll need to apply it, and with a little bit of know-how, you can go personally into Terminal, open up the config file for that particular piece of software, scroll down to the lines of text that have been identified by the programmer, and simply edit those couple of lines of text.
It's not quite that simple, unfortunately, Jack.
Okay. Well, certainly that's been sort of my experience with perhaps not with software so much, but certainly with the configuration of firewalls and stuff like that. That's essentially how you utilise that sort of configuration editor.
That's right, yeah. When it comes to a program like Nix or any other big programs for Linux, they're all compiled from the source code using a command called make config. And the source, what you would need to do is unmake it or get the source code.
Right, okay. I see, so it's a package.
To rebuild it for your machine. And you would need to learn how to do that. But that has a huge advantage for you if you can learn how to do that. Because all these big programs are designed to work on every computer. And so they got loads of stuff in them that you don't need for your computer.
Mm.
So if you build your own software from source, you can have it lightning fast and absolutely fine-tuned and honed to run precisely perfectly on your particular machine.
Yeah, I see. I've got a friend who's an expert website builder, and she has the most incredible ability to build these whistles and bells web pages that load in an instant. And it's simply that, is that she goes into the source code and strips out loads of stuff that she knows to be unnecessary for the majority of machines.
That's right. That's right. The other thing about Linux is very nearly all of the internet is running on Linux servers.
Yeah.
And that's simply because it's financially free.
Yeah. And, I mean, I did a network inquiry through Terminal earlier on. Excuse me. And the response that I got back from the router and from my external hard drive was that both of them were recognised as Unix systems. Yeah. So both my O2 Linksys, I think, router with which I access the internet, and my Iomega external hard drive are obviously both based around a Unix operating system.
Yeah, they've both got a Linux in them, definitely. They're really cut down little tiny operating systems. They've just really got the kernel only.
Yeah.
And they run a treat. They really do run a treat. It's on every router in the world. Very nearly.
Yeah, well,
there aren't any Windows routers out there.
Sorry?
There aren't any Windows routers out there. There's none of them running Windows, you know?
Right, yeah, no. Can't say can't say that I've ever seen any evidence of Microsoft involved in them.
No, and I like using it, you know. I like messing with it and playing with it.
I mean, how would this bode? I mean, one situation that I've got here is that I foolishly bought a gigabit router for my network here, but it had the USA binaries on it, and it worked when I initially connected it up, and then O2 upgraded their hardware at their end, and it stopped working as a consequence of that. We went through all the various options, and it needed a switch to be changed inside the router software that wasn't available because it was the US version. I'm wondering if possibly if that's most likely to be Unix code as well, if there wouldn't be some way of possibly delving inside that router and rummaging around and seeing if there's some software switch that I can alter to.
And probably very easy also.
Okay. Well, that's probably worth a try then, because
I'd email the router company, because I'd send them an email and ask them what firmware upgrade should you use, explaining your problem, and they'll just point you to the link for the right firmware and give you the instructions to upload the new firmware to your router.
Yeah, no, it's easy enough to get the firmware. For some reason, this particular router was locked to this US market firmware and was balking at any attempts to try and change the firmware on it. So that was why I was wondering if perhaps through Linux I might be able to access some software switch inside of it that will be locking me out.
this is where the Linux licensing system comes into its own, Jack. Because it's in the license that you must give it away for free. And because it's in the license that you must allow the users to alter it, the company that made your router has no leg to stand on with refusing to give you the proper firmware for wherever you are. The license makes them do it.
Okay. I mean, the only thing that I'm perhaps a little concerned about with this router is that maybe it's a hardware issue and that there's a specific hardware difference between the European and the US types of it, although the part number appears to be the same. So,
yeah, it may well just have some dip switches in the back and you need to flip one.
Yeah, I had wondered about taking the case off.
You've emailed the company, mate, because they might ask that question. If you've opened the case, they do have a commercial license on the hardware.
Right, okay.
So they can say, sorry man, you voided the license and they won't help you.
Okay.
But on the software, I'm afraid you've got them by the short and curlies, mate. They have to help.
Okay, that's certainly worth a look. I mean, if it is a hard dip switch, then there will be no way around that issue other than going inside the case and actually changing that dip switch, because that will activate a different part of the circuit that won't be available with that dip switch closed.
Yeah. And, of course, having a Google around it as well might help you. Someone else might have had the problem already.
Yeah, certainly worth a look. I've been too busy with my operating systems to go into routers just yet, but it would be really nice to get this router back up and running, because most of my machines in the house are gigabit network enabled, and unfortunately the only routers that O2 can supply by them, you know, I mean, their OEM routers are all 100k.
Yeah. Do you need that speed at home, though?
You'd be surprised at the size of the files that I end up chucking around here, because I do quite a lot of heavy video editing, and because most of it's connected to, most of it's stored on an external drive array, that, the network does end up carrying quite a bit of traffic, sort of locally.
Of course it would, yeah.
And with things like Audacity edits as well, when you're actually editing from within Audacity, the file remains on the serve drive, and you edit through the network, and if you've got a slow connection, that can become very tedious.
Of course, yeah.
Especially with a large file. So,
if I'm being honest here about my use of Linux over the years, I've really only ever used it for the standard, ordinary things that people use computers for. You know, maybe a bit of image editing would be the height of it. You know, surfing the web and writing documents, and that has always been relatively easy. My experience now that I'm trying to do a little bit more sophisticated things with it is that it can get quite difficult quite quickly. And you're always learning, you know. It's quite... you sound like you're doing much more sophisticated things with computers than I would ever have done.
Well, I suppose I've got quite a strong background with them. I mean, like I say, I've never really been a great experimenter with the software side of things, but I've always been, like you said, a tinkerer. Yeah. And as a consequence, I've actually got to know computer hardware incredibly well, to the level of when I was talking about the hot rod that I built. I actually built that on harmonic principles, and this is something that I have found completely absent from any computer technical literature. And what I found was that clock speeds, if you harmonise the clock speeds into multiples of each other, then the available data traffic runs much more smoothly, and you can actually find that by turning down a processor or a memory bank to a harmonic rather than to just a randomly selected maximum speed, that you actually end up with a faster machine that runs cooler and is able to process faster.
That makes perfect sense to me when I consider that the data that computers move around is in discrete sized chunks, if you like. The chunks are all
and just to explain that each one of those chunks is transmitted from point to point within the computer on something that's known as a clock. And that this is just simply a gate that only will allow a certain number of those packets through in any given minute.
So when the clocks are in time with each other, everything runs more smoothly. This is what
Yeah, essentially. I mean, there are certain sort of fundamentals, and you often end up with some fairly odd clocks to select from in order to be able to actually make your sort of harmonic. But you got your clock on your front side bus, which is your communication route between your memory and your CPU, and then you've got your main CPU clock and your main memory clock. And the harmonising of the three of them, I actually found that front side buses actually ran. I had a hypertransport front side bus on one machine. It was running at 2200 cycles. So I mean, an absolute ridiculous 2 gigahertz front side bus. And I actually found that by running that down to sort of 1860 or something, which harmonised in with the 2.4 clock of the processor and the 860 something or other clock of the memory, and suddenly the machine kind of sprung into life.
To simplify what you've just said, you could say that you're making all these things in tune with each other.
Yeah, essentially that was what set me thinking about it. Was I realised that all of these frequencies that I was dealing with. I'll tell you what actually made me notice it was, when you have a processor that blows over on an audio line, and you can actually hear the processor number crunching.
I've never experienced that.
Okay, all right. I had all sorts of problems with that in the early days of broadcasting, simply because Windows PCs aren't built with heavy enough audio shielding. And as a consequence, if you don't get a high enough end audio in your Windows machine, you'll end up hearing the processor whirring on all of the soundtracks. But essentially it makes a kind of a chirping noise, a bit like the old modem sound.
Oh, I've heard that.
But at a much faster, a much higher pitch.
Yeah.
And you can actually hear the processor kind of running up and down through a sort of scale as it's doing its number crunching.
Yeah. Your mate Nick's got a question in the chat box, and he says, how about tuning the PC to solfeggio?
I didn't know about those at the time, Nick, but certainly that would be something that could be worth considering. I mean, again, they're just before you undertake this, you have to realise the amount of maths that you have to do, because it's not a one-to-one clock either.
No.
So you don't have each of these devices working on a single clock to generate that frequency from.
No.
They're all running on different clock rates. So your processor may be running on a 12 times or a 19 times clock, where the actual cycles have to be multiplied by a factor of 19 in order to calculate the overall clock speed. Your front side bus may be running on a 2 times multiplier. Your DDR may be running on a 6 times multiplier. Your graphics card may be running on a different multiplier.
Yeah. I fear at this point that we may have lost much of our audience, Jack.
Geekfest.
I'm afraid so.
Again, it's fascinating to me, certainly, that I haven't found anything in the technical literature about this, and yet to all of us here now, it all seems so self-evident.
It makes sense.
It makes sense, yeah. And practically, I would love to know other people's experience of it as it goes, or whether I just managed to happen to stumble upon a sweet spot on a particular machine, and that this isn't actually a kind of exportable thing. But certainly, I think if you're one of those that likes widgeting about under the bonnet of your PC, and if you can save your BIOS settings comfortably and resort to the old settings, go in and have a fiddle and see what you can do. Turn things down rather than turn things up, but turn them down very selectively.
I cheat with that one, Jack. I take my digital camera out and I take a picture of the BIOS settings.
I've actually got most of the machines that I've got now have actually got quite advanced BIOS, where you've got dual BIOS, so you can always have an experimental BIOS that you're running and still resort to your old one. But again, most people won't have the slightest clue as to what we're talking about with BIOS either, will they? BIOS is basically basic input-output system, which is the black screen with text on it that you see popping up on a computer if you haven't got splash screen disabled in the BIOS.
Yeah.
It's where you get. It's where you get to if you hit F2 or one of the whatever the BIOS key is for your particular machine at the start-up screen, and it allows you to change all of the configured parameters of the hardware without the operating system.
Coming back to our audience and what they might want from the pair of us talking here, the thing about Linux operating systems is there's loads of them, and a couple of note that are really worth trying are the Puppy, P-U-P-P-Y Linux variants, which are designed specially just to run on USB sticks, and are rocket fast because they just run in memory.
Okay, and of course it's solid-state memory in the case of a USB stick, which is, I think, something like 1,000 times factor faster than any hard drive.
Oh, much. Well, in fact, Puppy Linux is actually running on the machine's RAM. It copies the whole operating system onto the machine's RAM.
Okay.
The random access memory. That's your gigabytes of memory in your machine.
Yeah, so you're not even relying on a 480 megabit connection with the USB. That's direct.
It's about 1,000 faster than a USB memory would be, which is about a factor of 1,000 faster than a hard drive would be. So it's really, really, really quick. You can you click on your web browser and it just boom, open instantly.
I think these are the operating systems that I've seen that have been installed on something that looks roughly the size of the power transformer that you use for your phone charger. I've seen network-enabled PCs where it's just got an NIC port, a USB port, and a VGA port. You plug it into a power socket and plug it into a network, and it's a network-enabled PC in something the size of a plug.
It's called the Shiva Power Plug, the device you're talking about. Homes for media centers, and what they do is they plug in a little USB wireless yoki for a wireless connection if it doesn't have one, and they plug into the other USB port a great big hard drive, and they have all their media on that hard drive, and it's available over the Wi-Fi all over the house, so everyone in the house can play any tunes from the central media store, or you can play videos on your TV, the whole lot.
Excellent.
All the device that's plugged into your plug socket, and it's using about 8 watts of power.
Which is a tiny
comparison
amount.
to a desktop PC, which is using perhaps 200 watts, or a laptop, which is using perhaps 90.
Or perhaps this bloody Dell monolith that I'm sitting next to with its kilowatt power supply.
Oh, blast.
No, seriously, kilowatt power supply.
Ouch.
Yeah. Fortunately, I believe its power management means that it very rarely ever actually runs at a kilowatt. But even so, that is just such a stupid amount of power for a bloody computer. You could heat your house from that, for God's sakes.
Well, yes, you could.
Turn the central heating off and gather around the back of the PC in the cold weather.
That's one of the biggest problems they have with all these big server farms that the internet runs on, is keeping them cool. They tend to build it in places like Norway, like north of the Arctic Circle for that reason.
But well, this is possibly why Iceland has been able to get away with its constitutional reforms and it's sticking 2 fingers up to the World Bank.
Well,
because what's Iceland sat on top of?
Yes,
a whole shitload of geothermal.
And not only that,
so they have energy security. They have island-based political sovereignty. And they have the infrastructure to be able to support huge server farms.
Yes, Iceland is a great place. I'm really interested in that country, especially since they've done this thing with their banks, which is so wonderful.
Yeah.
They seem to have broken free. And there's not very many of them. I would suggest that might be another reason for their apparent success at the moment.
Well, I seem to remember a statistic of 1 in 6 Icelandic population will have met the Prime Minister at some time.
I think there's not like 300,000 of them or something.
Yeah.
3 million. It's a small number, and I don't.
We may have our own version of Iceland just being set up as well with the Fulvik community. Have you heard about?
Google it, stick it in the chat box. How many people there are in Iceland? Let's find out.
I think we're quickest on the Google search.
well, I'm not going to do it and you're not going to do it. We're going to wait and see if anyone's listening, if they're going to do it.
That. I'll tell you what, though. I'm out of bloody tea. I'm going to stack up another couple of tunes so I can refresh my cup here.
Yeah, that's a good plan.
Can't be doing this. This is the joke as well, the remote 46 gigabyte music library I have to go to.
That's 6 weeks of music, isn't it?
I have no idea.
I reckon it's about 6 weeks without playing the same song twice.
Yeah, something like that.
300,000 is the answer.
What's that?
300,000 people in Iceland.
Oh, you were bang on. Look at that.
Captain Stingray and Kazar both answered us.
Oh, typical bloody
Same
Kazar
population
type.
as Bournemouth, says Kazar.
Yeah, well, if you haven't worked it out yet, Kazar's a smart ass. He's our smart ass, but he's a smart ass.
I'm going to give him some seeds. He asked me earlier, and I said I would.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, look, I managed to find something that's 6 minutes 49. That should be long enough for the kettle to boil.
Mine's already boiling, man. It's on the range.
Oh, you lucky git! I'd really love to have a range in the kitchen as it goes. I've got my stove in the living room, but the kitchen's a bit small, really. Which is, funnily enough, I was considering going rocket fuel, rocket stove range.
We could
for the
talk
kitchen.
one evening about burning waste vegetable oil, Jack. I know how to make burners to burn waste vegetable oil, which will go inside an appliance. And basically, a gallon of vegetable oil will last you for about 8 hours of continuous heat.
Okay, well, maybe we ought to drift onto that in 6 minutes 49 then. I'm going to go and stick the kettle on. Don't know what it was. Something dancey and 6 minutes long.
I'm afraid I don't know what it was either because I can't have the music playing at the same time.
Just to kind of round off the Linux chat, just one of the reasons that actually we mentioned just before the tune there about this monster bloody power supply on this Dell, and that this was one of the things that kind of set me down this particular path that I'm on now is simply that it's fairly habitual for the boys to wake up in the morning, power all the bloody computers on, and then piss off out to school, leaving them on.
Yeah.
And it gets expensive, if nothing else.
Sure does.
One of the things that really annoys me is that I'll come to this enormous kilowatt power supplied, multi-core, gigabytes of memory, terabytes of drive, and it's sitting there with a bloody Facebook page open, and that's all it's doing.
Well,
it could easily, like you say, it could just as easily be doing that on bloody 8 watts, not 1,000.
That's right, and there is in Linux something called a cron job, C-R-O-N. And you could write yourself a little cron job that might solve that problem completely for you, which the cron job would essentially wait until the PC has had no button press or mouse movement for whatever time you set, and turn itself off.
Very nice.
You could just write that in a few lines of code for yourself, and if you didn't know how to do it, you could ask on a forum somewhere, and someone who does know how to do it will tell you how.
Yeah, or it may even be an easily selected option in the GUI, in the graphical interface, in some of these more modern distributions.
As a matter of fact, it is. If you open your Power Manager, you can tell it to do that. But I used a cron job as an example, being a bit naughty, really, trying it's the power of the terminal, the power of actually putting code into this black box and having the computer do things. For instance, on my machine, if I open a terminal just now and I typed in the code sudo shutdown -h now, the machine would just shut off. If I typed in sudo nautilus, I would be able to open a file manager with root privileges, so I would be able to open every single file on the system, including the ones in other people's accounts, if I was the administrative user. You can open any program from the terminal. In fact, you could run radio broadcast software from the terminal without ever having to have a GUI open, and you could be looking at a black screen and it can just be doing its thing.
Yeah. I think it might be a little nerve-wracking.
Some people, but it's really powerful and it's very fast. But the biggest inspiration for me about Linux was its freedom and its the fact that people will help you when you've got a problem, that was the best thing about it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've my personal experience of the forums is that you can have to wait a significant length of time for a decent reply to a query, but...
That's right, nowadays you do, because there are now many, many, many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Linux users. But back in 1999, when I was starting, we were not so many.
No.
And
a merry band of brothers.
So, yeah, exactly. And
wouldn't fill a pub.
Well, we would have filled a pub, all right. Well, perhaps a small country, but there were much less of us, and sort of much more personal relationships. You know, I still regularly email and talk to folk I met on the internet back in 1999 who helped me with some of the first problems I had with Linux. You know, and since then we've been in constant communication. We've shared loads of stuff with each other. It's about sharing. That's what makes it good.
Mm.
And it's free to download, free to use. That also makes it good.
And it is actually a completely viable way of sticking two fingers up to Bill Gates.
Oh, beautiful. I mean, and commerce in general. You know, the thing is, I've got a friend in Dublin, the young fella, his name's Shane, and he was rooting around in the skips, you know, he does that sort of thing. He likes to skip, you know. And he found this old Mac in a skip at the back of Trinity. He pulled it out and we had a broken power supply. And he fixed the power supply. But no OS, no license or nothing, you know. And this fella's got no money, you know. So we put Linux on it. Happy days, man. It's a working computer for nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And how many of the listeners are going to have an old box, an old broken box under the stairs that's likely in 99% functional condition? And if you're anything like this bloody house, the rate that we get through computing hardware is quite alarming. Excuse me, with the four boys and me and my screwdriver.
One other thing about Linux is, you know the way with the Windows operating system, after you've had your laptop for 2 or 3 years, you know, it starts to slow down.
Yeah, the registry gets rather top-heavy.
Really get difficult, and that doesn't happen with Linux.
Mm.
It's very stable. You can have a Linux box up and running for 10 years, and it won't ever crash.
Yeah, well, hardware failures dependent.
Their stability is unparalleled. It doesn't crash, you know.
Mm.
It just works.
Yeah, I noticed with Ubuntu, it doesn't actually crash, but it does tell you that something was running unstably and was about to crash, and that it stopped it from doing so.
That's something that's creeping in the more modern distributions as things get more sophisticated. Things are starting to crash. I'm very happy with that because they love all the... One thing about the multimedia-based distributions is they play games much better. And of course, you know, kids at computer games, they like those computer games, you know.
Mm.
And the multimedia distributions tend to run games very, very well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm incredibly happy with the studio machine.
All the games are free too, incidentally.
Hmm?
The games are free too.
Well, I'm constantly referring to Buckminster Fuller lately, but another one of the things that Buckminster Fuller pointed out was that in the age of digital media, that in fact intellectual property needs to go out of the window when it comes to data.
Sure it does.
That the very concept of intellectual property and data is incongruous, and if we can remove the price tag attached to data transmission, then theoretically it should actually be possible to pare down.
Profits. That seems to be making stuff free is clearly sensible. The old rocket stoves are a great example of that. You know, that was open source engineering.
Yeah, there's the whole open source engineering field is an incredible resource. If anybody hasn't delved into that yet.
Just had someone says sound's gone. I'm not seeing it on the player though.
Sorry, what's that?
Someone says the sound is gone, but I think it's Kaz are being naughty.
Yeah, no, I think it's just... Yeah, no.
Yeah. So we kind of...
well, I'm showing coding this end, so...
Right. The old rocket stoves are a great example of the power of open source, though, because never before in the history of engineering has a new way of, in this case, burning things spread so quickly. It's been very, very rapid. You know, from the first, I discovered rocket stoves back in 1999 or thereabouts. Now I see them everywhere. You know, they're all over YouTube.
Yeah, yeah. Like I suggested, I have a small kitchen and an inadequate central heating system, and so I do rely on my wood stove in the living room, but would dearly love to duplicate my wood burning capacity to the kitchen. And I noticed you were talking about rocket stoves running happily on like a car exhaust pipe sized.
That would be a very low heat output stove. The area of the feed pipe, the cross-sectional area, really controls the heat output with a rocket stove. So the bigger your pipe, the more heat.
Okay.
And I would suggest that for a sort of standard-sized room in a London house, that a 4-inch tube would be more than adequate.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to be able to heat on top of the thing as well, so that would be a consideration for me. And I think I would.
I'll find Jack and post it or send it to you by email. I might even stick it up on TNS. I made it out of some stainless steel pipe and an old gas cylinder. It's got a hot plate.
Okay, well, that's pretty much the lines along which I was thinking myself. So, and I've built a few gas bottle stoves in the past. I prefer cast iron for my wood stoves. Really not happy about the longevity of mild steel for wood stoves.
No, stainless steel is your man, and there's nice quality stainless steel available for building, and it cuts nicely and welds nicely. They use it in the food industry a lot. It's a particular kind of stainless steel that's designed for being heat resistant, all stainless steel is, but for being easy to work.
Yeah.
They use, pizza factories and places.
I think you'll find it's the 316 grade that you're on about there, or the 18A.
Yeah.
And they're both sort of cutlery grade is what most people would know it as, but yeah, as you say, it has the properties of being malleable and easy to work.
Yeah, and you'll often find that if you can find a food processing factory close to you, head round the back where the fitters are. There's usually a skip with bits of pipe and bits of metal that they've got offcuts in.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how I get my stuff. There's a pizza factory in Longford. Sometimes I go over there and I knock on the back. Now, I haven't been there for years. My factory mightn't even be there, but that's where I got my last bit of stainless to build my last stove from. Well, I just called round the back and I knocked on the door and I says, listen, lads, I want to build a stove, and I was looking in the skip and I noticed you had that bit of metal and that bit of metal. Can I have those? I said, of course you can, mate.
Yeah.
Off I went.
Yeah, you rarely ever get a refusal, I find, when you kind of approach companies for their waste products.
That's right, yeah, just go and ask for it. It's, and very often the fella you talk to, he's interested and he wants to know what you're going to build, and he's really interested in what you want to build. He wants to help you,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm actually in the position here of my local MOT garage where I take my car to be MOT'd. Has offered me workshop space and free power to develop any of these sort of ideas.
Cool, well, there you go. I mean, it's all possible, isn't it?
I mean, they're a lovely bunch of chaps around there, you know what I mean? I don't suppose you would get that sort of an offer at your average kind of garage, but these lads are a bunch apart, and yeah.
I notice, actually, that there's nice chaps everywhere, mate. You just got to be able to find them and see them.
Yeah, certainly, and sort of carrying yourself well is always a good way of meeting them, I find.
Yeah, you think, you're talking, you do. That seems to be a bit of a mantra on PNS, this think, talk and do, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's the essence of plastic reality, if we're going to change the future.
Absolutely. Well, we say that, change the future. I mean, every time you take a breath, you change the future.
True. Just to mention in the chat there, if anybody interested in wood stoves or rocket stoves, we have established a small working group on Skype. It's only quite small at the minute, not a lot of activity on there. But anybody actively wanting to pursue the installation or assembly of wood stove or rocket stove equipment, then give either me or Tim a shout, and we'll include you in the Skype group.
Deadly, we definitely will. Another thing I should say about rocket stoves is they're very suitable for an urban environment. Really for two strong reasons. Well, three even I can think of now. The first one would be they're smokeless, so there's no smoke. Very good in an urban environment.
Absolutely.
The second one would be
just to enhance the reasons for this being that within kind of the first 2 years of me installing my wood stove to my London terraced house, I think we had 3 visits from the fire brigade from local neighbours phoning up insisting that our house was on fire.
Yes. So that's a good one, isn't it? That's going to be a help. No,
yeah, that's definitely a bonus.
Right. The other one is the kind of fuel they use. They like long, thin sticks. Well, if you look in your urban environment in skips all around you, you will find long, thin sticks. Plenty of them. Pallets, bits of waste wood, they're all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, most people couldn't really consider my approach of wood harvesting, of going out with a chainsaw in a car and just...
And the other thing is, you can even burn hedge clippings in them.
Yeah, any dry hydrocarbon is going to basically go in it, isn't it?
It's fuel that really no one else wants to use.
I mean, I would suggest that even plain brown cardboard would go pretty well in something like that as well.
It might do. I've never tried cardboard in a rocket stove, but I'd suggest that there might be a bit too high of an ash content in the cardboard.
Okay, yeah, you do get quite a big ash deposit from it, but certainly as far as if I'm stuck here for wood and haven't gone out and got any, well, our local shops have a specific lamppost that they pile all of their industrial card up against for a specific collection. And so there are large bundles of folded flat cardboard boxes sitting there with a bit of sellotape around there at any time. And certainly I can warm this house quite comfortably and conveniently, other than the ash build-up, on rolled-up brown cardboard.
Yeah, in fact...
if you need to go for the stuff that hasn't got the glossy coating on it, best, like I say, just plain brown cardboard. Sometimes you can get the white cardboard that's only got a very thin water emulsion print on it, and that's okay, but anything that's got any sort of a glossy coating on it leaves far too much chalk behind, and then you just end up with shovelfuls of chalk to dig out with the ash.
Many years ago when I lived in Slough, which was an unpleasant place to live, but that's not it. we used to run out of fuel too, and we discovered that if you put the cardboard outside and let it get good and soaking wet, or you cook it and soak the hell out of it, that you could then pick it up with your hands and squeeze it into like briquette-shaped balls, squeeze all the water out, and we just hopped it in our greenhouse to dry, and this made lovely long burning briquettes that burned really quite well. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing with my wood stove is, like I was discussing with you in the wood stove group there the other day, is that it is so damn airtight and so thermally efficient that essentially if I put something like cardboard into it as a hot stove with some sort of embers in there, I can almost kind of work it as like a charcoal burner.
Yeah.
Where I can convert whatever's in there to ash without there ever even being a lick of flame. So really, once it's got up to temperature and has an ash pan, regardless of what the dry hydrocarbon is that you put in there, you can control the burn. I mean, I can even put like sort of Christmas tree clippings on there, which would normally just overwhelm any sort of wood stove. Asking for a chimney fire doing that on a normal wood stove. But on this thing, no, clamp the drafts right down, clamp the fluid right down, and make sure that you don't open the door till it's all fucking burnt.
That's right. You're using air-restricted combustion there.
Yeah.
Which, when you get a proper understanding of rocket stoves, I would suggest is perhaps the wrong way round. You're far better off with fuel-limited combustion. when you limit the air, you don't get complete combustion. You see, you get a lot of smoke.
Yeah, like I say, that would be the case with a standard open firebox, but with the large damping plate.
Oh, you've got circulation inside your stove, so it's burning the smoke, isn't it?
Precisely, which is what I was saying, that the carbon monoxide gets converted in a proper wood stove to carbon dioxide, and you get twice the heat output.
Yeah, of course you do. So with some wood stoves, air limited.
Yeah, I mean, to be quite honest, it's the flue damper that's the primary. The drafts on the bottom are left pretty much closed. I mean, I rarely ever open them more than sort of half a turn on each thread, because any more than that, and it will just roar away and erode all of the embers, which is where your heat's coming from. So most of the control is actually done with the flue damper.
Yeah. The third advantage of rocket stoves for an urban environment is that the rocket stove has, if it's an inside designed rocket stove, it has the chimney built into the stove, which means that the flue gases have a positive pressure. The pressure is slightly above atmospheric pressure. Now, I'm talking about a tiny pressure difference here. I'm talking millibars.
Yeah, but enough for it to exert a outward force.
Enough to move the gases. And that means that you can move the gases through some sort of a thermal store, be it a pile of bricks with a channel through it, or an earth bench, or whatever you want, and cool your exhaust gases almost completely. And because of the positive flue pressure, they don't need a chimney. You could literally make a hole in the side of your flat at head height and put the pipe out there, and put the exhaust gases out at that level. No problem, because the chimney's in the stove and it's driving the gases out of the house. It's like a heat pump inside the stove. And you can actually cool the gases to the degree that you can lick the exhaust pipe. Get them down.
Again, I have to refer again to this highly efficient stove that I've got, in as much as the top of the stove nearest to the stack pipe, if you drop a droplet of water on it, it will instantly boil, and simultaneously the first thin part of the stack pipe, sort of 2-3 inches above the same spot on the stove, with the flue damper shut, and you can wet that, and the wet will stay there and slowly evaporate off.
That's right. So you keep a lot of your heat in your house.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly efficient.
Yeah. So efficiency is where it's at, I think, with energy for all of us. We're all using, I suggest, far too much energy far too quickly.
Well, it's moreover energy independence as well, because this was again something that like I say, we've got a hugely weak central heating system here. We've had adaptations done to the house by the council, and they extended the property and slapped another couple of radiators on the system, and it's never been able to support those extra couple of radiators, and subsequently the house without the wood stove would be almost impossible to actually heat to any reasonable degree.
Yeah.
So we already had the wood stove, and I was already using it anyway, so it really wasn't too much of an issue. It would be easy enough solved by demanding that the council fit a larger central heating system. But what tends to happen is each year when the cold snap first comes, the static state of the unused heating system refuses to kind of burst into life, and usually there's some kind of fettling required to get the actual system to run any sort of heat through the house.
Yeah.
And this year we had a particularly cold snap, came on particularly fast, and we found ourselves essentially with a situation where the central heating system was dysfunctional, or effectively dysfunctional, even though it was functioning, on a night when it was -3 in London. And of course we were laughing, because the wood stove chugs out 8 kilowatts, and apart from the very extremities of the house that aren't necessarily covered by the airflow from it, the entire house was warm as toast, sitting around in t-shirts.
It's gas-fired central heating you have, is it?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. There's a device called a System Link. It's another Irish device. A lot of people in Ireland have ranges. A lot of people in Ireland also have oil-fired central heating. And if you've ever had any experience of plumbing, joining two separate heat sources to one central heating system is not only difficult, but it's also dangerous. So this system link device is very clever, yoke. It's only a metal box that goes on the wall, but essentially you can put in, I think, up to 5, depending on the particular one you buy, 5 separate heat sources that all supply hot water to the system. And without any danger or any problems. If you just want to Google System Link, I think that's the name of the device. I might find it myself and put the link in the chat box.
I suspect that inside the box there will be a multi-plate heat exchanger, which is what I've been looking into for exactly that same purpose.
In fact, I've had one apart because I'm an engineer, and I like to look at these things.
Yeah, we do like to look inside the box.
And all that's in the box is a few baffles.
Yeah, that's basically, that's what...
I've just opened the website and everything seems to have changed. Well, they may have different things. I'm going to stick the website in the box anyway, because these guys are experts at joining together different central heating systems, which might be very useful to lots of people in the city who want to have some supplementary or alternative heat source that they can use when things are hard or things are difficult. You know?
Or it's simply, I have looked into the whole kind of looming energy crisis in great depth for many, many years.
Yes.
And apart from basic analysis of we're up shit creek without a paddle.
Oh, yeah.
That if we don't go to localised, independent energy self-sufficiency, we're up in even bigger shit creek without a paddle. So really, it's not even a matter of the niceties of saving a buck or two here and there. I genuinely, sincerely believe that we will start to see 1970s-like energy conservation going on a countrywide basis within a very short number of years. In fact, as far as heating, as far as domestic gas is concerned, all we need is a slightly heavier winter than 2010.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
We have no local domestic gas reserves anymore. We don't store it and we don't produce it.
I'm afraid you do have local domestic gas reserves. They come from the Corrib. They're Irish gas that Royal Dutch Shell took. The Irish government just gave it to us. You're getting that gas, mate. You do your own supply.
Well, I mean, the primary English supply now is from the Norwegian gas fields via an enormous pipe undersea. But that whole infrastructure was established on a median temperature gradient.
Yeah,
and so what happened in 2010 was simply that the temperature gradient exceeded the median that the system was predicted to support, and without any domestic reserves, we began to loom large in gas cuts.
Oh, big time. The Corrib gas, of course, isn't online yet because lots of us Irish people have been saying, listen, man, you can't steal our gas, it's not okay. And we've had a very, very successful protest that's been going on there for the past, I think, nearly 10 years now in Mayo and right at the edge of the sea. And we've been successful in holding back Shell for a very long time. We don't give our gas away like without a fight, you know.
Well, the real problem is going to come, and I must admit I haven't really been looking too deeply into the numbers, but the real problem is going to come when the likes of Saudi domestic product meets Saudi domestic demand.
Yeah.
And that's when the real shit's going to hit the fan, and that's really not that far off.
No.
If you
but
start,
it's not a problem as it would appear. In the past, certainly in the countryside, many people dealt with heating issues like that, because if you have to cut your own wood by hand, it's hard work, right?
Bloody hell, right and all.
No, by hand I'm talking, no chainsaws.
Been there.
Okay. Well, what these people did in that situation, you know, they got a big house in the country, you know, and it's bloody freezing. Well, what they do is they only heat one small space in the house. And that, I suggest, is a very good solution for very nearly everybody the next time it gets cold and there's a heat crisis. To already have had prepared, just take one room in your house. give it some source of heat that you can rely on, like a rocket stove or a wood stove.
Well, most houses, obviously not necessarily so in flats, but the majority of houses will have some sort of a flue, even if it's only suitable for a gas fire.
Well, with a rocket stove, as I said, you don't need a flue.
Well, and with the rocket stove output, it would be possible to use one of those gas flues for a significant number of years before you started to have problems with it. The only issue with using a gas flue for a wood stove is that the duct at the top of the roof blocks off after a time.
Well, when you get with a rocket stove, you're getting over 99% complete combustion. And what that means is that the gases that you're putting out are pretty much carbon dioxide and water. There's nitrogen too from the atmosphere and things like that, and a few other little bits. You can't really even smell the smoke from them.
Yeah.
The problem that the wood stoves in general have with the flues is that the combustion products are acidic, and they actually corrode the flue. You get rust; they rust out, don't they? And so, because you don't have these toxic and corrosive combustion products from a rocket stove, I suggested it's possible to build one and make a flue out of tin foil. And it might last a surprise. Well, tin foil wouldn't work as aluminium, it wouldn't be able to the temperature, but something as thin as tin foil.
Yeah.
With a higher melting point. And it'd be fine for years. I have used rocket stoves with the very thin stainless steel flue pipe that's generally sold over here for oil boilers. Now, this stuff's less than a millimetre thick.
I'd suggest it's probably not even stainless steel either. That's probably chrome steel.
Or whatever it's made of. But it works fine with rocket stoves.
Oh, no, absolutely. It's actually, which is something that I was actually going to point to a minute ago when we were talking about acquiring stainless steel, is as well as that 18.8 and 316 malleable grades of stainless, there is this, it's usually used in the catering industry, something called chrome steel, which is the basically the same recipe for stainless steel, only without the molybdenum.
Yeah, that may well be the stuff I got from the back of the pizza factory. It welds beautiful and it cuts beautiful.
Okay, well, the way to determine whether you have chrome steel or true stainless steel is with a magnet.
Ah, right.
If a magnet will stick to it, then it's chrome steel. If a magnet won't stick to it, then it's full stainless.
I shall borrow my son's Geomag or whatever it's called. Tip out to the rocket stove when we're finished on the phone.
Well, theoretically, it should be possible to weld chrome steel with a regular mild steel welding wire. You will get some blistering problems at the weld site from the chrome boiling out of the steel.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly that would resist the corrosive action of the majority of exhaust gases. If you were to go the whole hog and go to the 316 stainless steel grade, the non-magnetic type, you would probably find that it would be completely inert. There's certainly some grades of stainless steel. Actually, I used to work at stainless steel stockholders, so this is one of the reasons why I clued up on stainless. There is actually one grade of stainless that's for sort of power plant use and oil installation and stuff like that, and that is completely inert. There's almost nothing on Earth that touches it apart from a few of the sort of exotic acids.
Another good source of heat-resistant steels I should mention is gas cylinders that have contained combustible material. A Freon cylinder that had gas for a fridge in it is no good, but any gas cylinder that contained combustible material like butane or propane or any of the gases we generally burn, they're made of fire-resistant steel just purely for safety reasons. So it's more difficult for them to explode in a fire.
It's also worth pointing out here as well, one of my kind of concerns around rocket stoves and homemade wood burning devices is the thinness of the walls and the readiness to glow red when being kind of driven hard. And having kind of personal experience, having a close friend of mine having lost a child to a fire, I'm very much aware of the danger of having wood-burning appliances that can incandesce. And essentially anything that is incandescing is putting out radiant heat at enough of a rate that any combustible regularly combustible fuel around it will simply reach its flash point and burst into flames without the need for a naked light or any necessary any prolonged smouldering beforehand.
That's right. Fortunately, rocket stoves don't have that problem because the burn tube inside a rocket stove is surrounded usually with about 4 inches of insulation all the way around.
Okay.
And
I mean, this was something that you were mentioning in the Skype room, weren't you, of using something like vermiculite?
That's right. Vermiculite is my favourite material. It's sold as a chimney insulation in hardware stores in lovely...
Or as a gardening stuff in your gardening thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the gardening one because I wouldn't be able to rely on its heat resistance.
Okay, see what you're saying. To be quite honest, I would be very surprised if any vermiculite is basically just a powdered, not even powdered, but granulated gypsum. So it's essentially asbestos.
Rock, I believe. It's rock that's been popped like popcorn with heat.
Yeah. And are you sure you're not thinking of perlite there?
I'm not sure.
I think vermiculite. Yeah, I think vermiculite may go through. I think vermiculite might go through a heat process where it's the pores expand. But I think perlite's the one that you're thinking there that kind of goes like popcorn. It's like little feels like polystyrene.
Yes.
It's the most peculiar thing. You feel you can be convinced that it's polystyrene packing, but yeah, entirely mineral.
Bandman Dave's put something great there in the chat box as well, which is very relevant to rocket stoves, and that is that dry wood ash also insulates.
Very true.
In some of the very first rocket stoves I built, I used ash as an insulator. And it is very, very good indeed.
I bet it is.
If you build an open fire, you can make your own wood ash. So you can start from zero.
I mean, somebody was asking earlier in the chat about where can you buy rocket stoves, and I suppose...
You can.
I'm sure there are places...
They make them in China, man. You can buy one. It's an outside cook stove designed as, but you can use them in your own kitchen because, as I say, it only puts out CO2 and water as its exhaust. It's like having a gas stove in your kitchen.
Yeah. But moreover, that a rocket stove should largely be fairly readily assemblable out of fairly ordinary kind of domestic waste. You know what I mean, like empty paint cans and
absolutely. It's
really large bean cans and things like that can be used in the manufacture of a rocket stove.
Oh, for sure. There's loads of people on YouTube doing rocket stoves of all sorts. You just have to have a quick look at. Do rocket stove search on YouTube. There's loads of people talking about it. But
that's one of the key points that I wanted to make about the watching out for thin metals incandescing. Is that the consideration for insulation has to be borne in mind when you're working with materials that are that thin, with temperatures that are that high.
Yeah, and I have a friend who I won't mention his name, but he had, when it comes to people experimenting on their own with wood stoves, he had a rather unfortunate experience with his and got rather badly burned. And it's a very important cautionary note. You know, read the manual, understand what you're doing. This is dangerous stuff we're talking about here.
It can be.
We're talking about the potential to build up large volumes of explosive gases and have them go bang in your face. So it's important.
Well, I mean, another issue with the insulation thing from personal experience, never actually done it with a thinned metal giving way because I've always insisted on decent thickness of cast iron. But I once not restored, but returned to active service an antique French stove.
Oh yeah!
And after using it for a number of years, I had it running absolutely blazing hot with a most enormous firebox full of wood. When the denatured cast iron gave way around the stove hole.
Yes, it will do that.
And the weight of the stack pipe actually drove the outlet from the cast iron outlet from the stove down into the firebox, and we had a significant fire on our hands from around the now open kind of back of the stove.
Yeah, Josh has just put in the chat box. YouTube is full of them. There's a lot out there. I presume you're talking about rocket stoves, Josh, and you're right. There are a lot out there, and the nice thing about them is it's fairly accessible technology. It's pretty easy once you get your head around how it works. Once you've built your first one, essentially, you're away then.
And there is something incredibly rewarding, I find, about supplying your own energy.
Yeah.
I can't wait for winter when it's coming through autumn, because it means that I'm back out with my chainsaw over my shoulder, lugging about big bits of wood. And there's nothing so, I don't know, satisfactory to the kind of hunter-gatherer in me than to know that everybody walks into my house and goes, oh, it's so nice and warm in here. And I know that I'm not paying a bloody penny.
It was the one thing I missed most when I worked abroad. For the few years I worked abroad, was we've always felled our own trees here and burned wood ourselves and collected our own firewood, you know. And I really missed that when I was working abroad and I was living in rented houses with gas or oil or whatever sort of central heating they had. I missed the fire. I missed the cutting of the wood. I there's nothing more satisfying than standing in front of a nice round big block of ash with an axe in your hand and just going snick round the edge. And
I find with teenagers it's incredibly therapeutic as well.
Very. Well, something I should mention about my house. I want to thank the 4 teenagers. When I was roofing it, we have a grass roof, you know, and I didn't want to use plywood because of the formaldehyde issue. So I found the factory that makes pallets, and I bought a whole pallet full of the material to make pallets. And I had loads and loads, thousands of these boards, you know, and each board's got like 8 nails in it. They're only 1.2 meters long, and they're only 3 inches wide or something. They're not very long. There are lots of them. Well, these 4 teenage girls sat on my roof for a whole summer with nails and hammers and their stereo, and they had a wonderful summer, and I got a roof.
That's what you call barn raising, isn't it?
Well, they had fun, you know, and they just nailed all those nails. Very, very therapeutic.
Mm. Yeah, I think we miss it. Just to point out as well, in case you haven't quite grasped where exactly I am here, but I'm at the cheap end of the Old Kent Road, approximately 1.5 miles from Tower Bridge.
Right.
So you can imagine the level of forestry that I'm surrounded by.
Yeah, not a lot, really.
But it's out there. So even people in the heart of town, if they're as determined as I am, and as be damned if you will, damned if you won't, 2 fingers to the law as I am, then basically if it's dead on the floor, it's mine. Until somebody else tells me otherwise.
Rocket stoves seem to be a popular subject here. I've seen lots of stuff going on in the chat box.
Yeah.
People posting links and stuff they've found, which is really good, because that's what we're about, isn't it? We're about sharing solutions.
Yeah, well, I mean, the brick stove as well is a brilliant idea. When I first came back to brick from living in the woods, the first thing that I had was just an empty fireplace and not even a saw or anything like that to be able to go and collect proper firewood. So I essentially gathered a selection of loose bricks that I found walking the streets with the dog. It was probably no more than 10 bricks to assemble a simple hearth, and simply fueled that, like you say, with twigs and bits of waste wood out of skips, and that, you know what I mean, was my alternative heat source before I had access to a decent fireplace, etc. So even just an empty fireplace in a under a chimney and a handful of house bricks is all you really need to be able to become fuel independent.
Absolutely it is. And being able to build your own stove, for a lot of people, I've noticed, I give a few rocket stove workshops. I gave one last summer at the All Ireland Permaculture Gathering. And when people build their first stove, they get this rush of independence. It's something that you can do for yourself. And once you can do it for yourself, it makes you feel really, really good. Would you agree? It makes you feel good to be able to build your own stove and get your own wood and make your own heat.
Absolutely. And like I say, that sensation isn't just one of achievement when you actually do it. The sense of achievement persists every time it gets bloody cold and you're sitting nice and warm and it's not costing you a fortune, when everybody else is sitting there worried about turning their thermostats up an extra degree and pulling on an extra cardy because they can't afford the gas bill this year.
That's right. Or they're worrying about they're worrying about January coming in. It's cold in December because they're going to spend all their money at Christmas. They won't have to price the gas bill in January.
Well, one thing that I did comment on in a recent programme as well was that I would have always suggested that doing domestic heating from firewood would be an uneconomical alternative to anything like to the likes of gas or electricity, cost for cost. But seeing a Forestry Commission breakdown of unit costs per BTHU during a recent bit of research, they're now suggesting that at £45 a tonne, 3% moisture content firewood works out at about 3p a unit.
Yeah. It is cheaper.
So, you would actually be cheaper going and buying a £45 tonne per tonne load of firewood than paying to run your gas central heating.
Unfortunately, it's not a solution that's... It's good for some people. We can't all do it because if you use traditional methods of home heating with firewood, like a range or not a super efficient wood stove, but a standard kind of wood stove.
Yeah. My level of consumption of wood is absolutely hideous, and really
it takes around an acre of land.
Well, this is it. It would be an inexcusable level of consumption for my position in the city, except for the fact that there are so few of us out there going and collecting this firewood that I can go to any woods and know that there will be any number of dead trees that are going to remain uncollected unless I'm the one that collects them.
That's right. It takes around an acre of land per household. I'm a forester, so I know a little bit about this sort of thing, about how fast trees grow and such. And 1 acre will keep a household self-sufficient in wood forever.
Yeah.
With coppice management.
Yeah,
it has to be very easy because you're cutting the trees at the ideal diameter. You're cutting them at around 4 or 5 inches diameter, so they only need splitting in half. Bigger spits, and you've got all your firewood forever. It's all small, easy to manage stuff when you use coppice management.
Mind you, saying that, even in central London, I am continually just devastated when passing road crews or gardening firms who are tasked with removing overgrown trees or trees for removal, and you see them putting the entire contents of an 80-year-old tree in a chipper.
I know. I would suggest that a relationship with a tree surgeon might be something that would benefit you enormously, Jack.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I had actually heard that the council are actually obliged to deliver firewood if they collect it. Unfortunately, I suspect now that being that the council have tendered all of the London park management out to competitive tender, and it's all private companies doing that, I'd suggest that would probably actually now be almost impossible to actually achieve. And the other issue, of course, is with receiving live greenwood, is that realistically you need a minimum of 3 months and ideally at least a year to season it to a suitable moisture content.
Well, storage is going to be your issue there,
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why I rely on theft.
However, these tree surgeons are almost invariably paying to get rid of the wood that they produce. Okay,
so it would be worth... certainly, I could accept...
So there may be an incentive there for one of them if you can find him or her.
Yeah, well, I've certainly got enough...
Got the wood for 12 months for you.
Well, I've even got storage enough here for a year's worth of wood. I've got a fairly respectable sized garden, and would be able to have a season's worth of stacked wood accumulated over the course of a year.
Mm-hmm. There's another solution also I can offer as well, Jack, and that's an outside brick-built rocket stove inside a small shed that heats the floor. And with a small portion of the firewood you collect, you can dry it to your stove moisture content in probably 3 weeks or a bit less. just by going out every morning and put one little fire in that stove.
Hi, Jake. Yes, I'm on air, Jake.
Sorry.
My eldest.
My family, bless them, are wonderful. My son just walked in silently, tapped me on the shoulder silently, and put a cup of tea in my hand.
Oh, bloody hell, why can't I get mine that well trained? My teacup's completely bloody empty. The gits.
Oh, they're not trained at all.
No, mine are completely untrained in the arts of being my children. They should know better.
Oh, I'm very fond of mine.
Yeah, no, I've got good boys. So there goes Jake, who just poked his head in there. He's just got back from Coventry from going to pick up his diploma. Got his degree in biochemistry and genetics.
Wow.
He's currently improving the medical profession's ability to detect cocaine in evidence samples.
Excellent.
Yeah.
My son's behind that now. He's 11. He can ride a unicycle and he could do woodwork and stuff, but I think biochemistry might be a bit beyond him yet.
Yeah, no, I'm dead proud of Jake. Is there any kind of really academic? Well, I don't know. We got another one of the twins coming up, who's pretty much his sort of academic equal, and we may see some remarkable things from. But he's the only really academic lad out of the four so far. But they're all bloody good boys. So
when I think about the things that I've learned in my life and the things that I know best, I discover that the ones I know the best are the ones I learned on my own, by myself, because I was interested. Even though I had a good education, I was trained as an engineer before I ever learned to be a forester and things. But the things I know the most about, I found out about on my own because I was interested.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is something that we're now confronted with because one of our crew here, one of the twins, does have some. He's diagnosed as ADHD, but is essentially hyperactive and doesn't fit very well with schooling, and we're confronted with exactly those considerations to be making right at this moment.
I would suggest that the trivium and the quadrivium might help that young man a great deal.
Yes,
just give him the tools of learning.
Yeah, well, he gets all of that on the side anyway. I'll tell you another one that I found as well is sacred geometry for engaging children with maths. Sort of giving them...
geometry is magic, isn't it? It's brilliant. You get a 3D thing going and they get right into it, don't they?
Yeah, and well, not only that, but just seeing the not necessarily the need for maths, but the beauty in it.
Yeah. There's a nice... You have... I've forgotten the name of it. I'll think of it in a moment. It's about numbers, and it's really full of those sorts of nice, interesting things that get you interested, I'm just trying to think of it now. I can't get it out of my head. I'm sorry I mentioned it. It'll come out in a minute.
Okay.
I might actually stick my head open. One moment.
Well, I'm going to be stacking up a tune because we're coming up to midnight now, and
yeah, I think we'll call that a day, will we?
I think so.
It was lovely talking to you, Jack. I really enjoyed it. First time talk. Got a nice voice, man.
Well, and it sounds like we're sort of we're travellers on a very similar path. I sort of originally trained as an engineer and a mechanic.
I think so, yeah.
And ended up in forestry. So I was foresting 60 acres of prime...
Well, that's right. I think what's going on here is... Yeah, it's joining up of consciousness that's going on, I think. That's what this new awakening is all about. As soon as we all join our consciousness together and realise that we're all about the same sorts of things and we're all going in the same direction and start to do it together, a lot of the problems in the world, I suggest, might just disappear.
And as well, I think a lot of this is kind of promulgated, the whole kind of ecology thing is promulgated through the press, and yet very few actual reasonable solutions are ever presented, and this is something that people are quite surprised, certainly when they turned up here, find that I've got the wood stove on the go, is
Yeah.
it would have never have occurred to them that it was possible in central London to run a wood stove. You know, I mean, from your own kind of production.
It's simple stuff. This is not hard.
No, I know.
It's simple stuff. It's not hard.
And what I'm actually sort of hoping to work on in the coming year is economical routes to harnessing all sorts of waste or spare energy. I'm looking into various solar arrays at the moment that don't rely on electricity, sort of solar collectors.
Yes.
And certainly, I mean, the
absolutely, solar panels.
Oh, you keep dropping out there, Tim. You there?
Yes, you were breaking up a bit.
I think we have. I think we have Irish.
We'll talk about. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Or maybe I can't.
Okay, my internet's gone dodgy, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, I think we've probably got a storm running up the Irish Sea. It often troubles our inter-Irish communications. I'll chuck a tune on anyway. Okay, guys, well, just thanks so much for coming on, Tim. You've been absolutely great. And I look forward to hearing your show whenever it's on. You got a regular slot yet? Oh, looks like we've lost him completely. All right.
Yeah, I haven't got a radio slot.
Oh, okay, you are still there. All right, well, look, I'm going to sign off. It's been fabulous having you on, Tim, and look forward to finding your show when you do finally find your slot. I'm not even going to wait for a reply.
Oh, what I do is I jump in whenever the host don't show.
Right, yeah, I was the hobo.
That's my job. I jump in when the host don't show.
I was the hobo of TNS for a while, the wandering host. Anyway, let's have a bit of Elvis Costello and shipbuilding, and I'm going to sign off because it sounds like you're about to break up completely. Good night, folks, and see you same time, same place next week.